Hello and welcome to my podcast, So P3M with Kailash Upadhyay. In this podcast, we explore various topics from project, program, and portfolio management. And our endeavor through this podcast is to discuss the strategies, the best practices, the lesson learned, and we invite expert guests from the industry who have vast experience in project, program, and portfolio management domain. And in this series, we have a very important topic today, which is closing the strategy execution gap, especially in the large organization. And to share expert insight, his experience, best practices, and lesson learned from managing the strategy and executing the strategy through project and program initiative and by managing the ongoing operations. And I invite my guest today, Dr. Mithun Nagawade. Let me introduce Mithun briefly. Mithun has over 20 years of industry experience. He has worked with Big Four consulting, and his diverse experience in outsourcing, business process management, legal managed service, IT-enabled services, and he also have the all project, program, and portfolio management certification. So let me welcome my guest, Mithun Nagawade. Hi, Mithun. Welcome to my podcast, P3M with Kailash Upadhyay.
Good morning and thank you, Kailash. I think this is a fantastic way to start the weekend. I'm excited, very excited to be here today, primarily because the topic that you just talked about is so close to my heart. So I'd love to share some insights on what I believe is one of the most critical issues that many organizations face today, especially the large organizations. And the reason I say this topic is very close to my heart, actually there's pun intended there, because this particular strategy to fruition and the gap, this has given me a lot of heartaches several times in my career. But in hindsight, if we really look at it, I think those are the lessons that have made me wiser. And when I run my global strategies now and the execution for it, I think I run it in a much better way. So yes, very close to my heart.
Thank you, Mithun. And once again, welcome. So Mithun, in this segment one, we're going to talk about, for our audience benefit, I would like you to tell my audience, what is this strategy execution gap is and why it is such a persistent problem, and particularly in the large organization.
Certainly, Kailash. I think that's a good segue to get into today's podcast, right? So for me, strategy and execution gap occurs when there's a big disconnect between what your organization's strategic goals are or what really your leader's vision and mission statements are as compared to the outcome that it delivers, or sometimes the outcome that it doesn't deliver, or the project gets midway through and dies its own life. And in large organizations, I think this issue is magnified due to multiple factors, right? Like fragmented communication, lack of accountability, and overly complex governance structures that just hinders rather than helping the entire project or the program team. In my experience of working for various Fortune 100 clients, whether it's at their offices or whether we're doing consulting projects, I think a lot of bold strategies were developed by some of the great leaders, and they really had the vision on what they wanted. But unfortunately, the execution faltered because teams at the mid-level and also the teams at the ground level didn't really understand they fit in and what they really are doing or what their efforts are going towards when it comes to the big picture. So I, as a mid-level manager, or I at the bottom of the pyramid, I just don't understand what's going on. What's the big picture that my leader has? And this disconnect not only resulted in wasted resources, wasted efforts, but it directly impacts the morale of everybody on that project team, let alone the market competitiveness that you lose, or let alone the velocity to the market when you're trying to launch a product, or if it's a service organization, you're trying to get any better with your service. So that's a vicious circle that an organization gets into.
That's really awesome, Mithun. And I really like the way you have put up this strategy execution gap. And I agree with you. Mithun, I want to share my own experiences around this. See, in a small organization, we don't see this problem, this problem so big. Let's take this example of add-on skills. We have a small team, strategy team, as well as our execution team. Both are not that very big. There are some 4-5 people who primarily works on strategy, and there are another some outsource people, some part-time professional, and some full-time hands. They execute our strategy. You rightly said this fragmented communication as one of the concern or one of the reason behind this strategy execution gap. I don't see that gap because we can meet frequently at the small organization, and we have that everyday connect. For us, it's not like, yearly communication from strategy to the execution team. For us, it's like, everyday communication. So this gap between strategy and execution, I don't see that big in the small organization. But you rightly said, especially in the large organization, this gap is very, very big. And this is what we're going to, in my segment 2, Mithun, I want to ask you some common causes and challenges that opens this gap between strategy and execution team. If you don't mind sharing us from your learnings, from your real world professional experiences, what are these common reasons, or what are the common causes that common factors that build this gap between the strategy and execution?
Sure. And I'm glad you asked this question because just last week, we were trying to put together a research paper on the gaps between strategy and execution and getting that strategy until the fruition stage. We were going through a lot of good journal articles, research papers, some Harvard Business Review. So I think I'll be able to add some flavor to that question and also cite some examples that I've been researching about. But if you could just go back, we talked about large organizations, right? In my mind, every time I work for these really large clients, Fortune 100 clients, it's like a big elephant walking, right? The bigger you get, it's difficult for you to just walk just for yourself. You struggle and you're not fast. And that's how these organizations become, with multiple layers of hierarchy and departments and bureaucracy then. And then, like it or not, we always thought that there's red tape in government organizations, but I have definitely seen organizations and departments having a lot of that. And while you're navigating through so many layers and so many hierarchies, it just slows you down. And that's what the white elephant analogy is all about. Anyway, having said that, coming back to your question of why I think there's a gap between the strategy and execution. Let me talk about this book that I've been reading. It's very popular. I think most of your audience would have had their hands on it. It's by the Harvard Business School professor, Dr. Robert Kaplan. And the book is called The Balanced Scorecard, which talks about how you take your strategy, how you run with it, and how you bring that to success. And a very striking research in this book talks about 90% of organizations failing when it comes to executing and bringing your strategy to success. 90%, that's a very big number. And if you really think about in terms of your own experience and the research that's available out there, in my own head, I kind of narrow it down to 3 things, right? The first one is because of siloed operations. Different departments or different teams in your organizations are so much into isolation that leads to complete misalignment of goals. And I'm going to cite an example here of IBM. If you recollect, personal computing became very popular in the early 2000s, right? IBM managers, when this was happening, continued to allocate the resources to their business's archaic aspects, like the mainframes. Again, very siloed. They kept doing their own things. As a result, IBM lost its industry standing to its competitors because the competitors began offering very well-built and very affordable PCs to its consumers. IBM lost out. Why? Siloed operations. That's the first reason that I was talking about. The second aspect that I attribute this to is your inflexible governance, and more often than not, ineffective risk management. Traditional governance models cannot keep up with the pace of your modern business environments. While a lot of organizations would focus on external factors, like they look at your emerging disruptive technologies, or they constantly do competitive analysis, or they look at your customer needs and how that negatively impacts your existing strategy. Many companies, in my opinion, forget to mitigate their own internal risks. Consider the downfall of Enron, infamous, right? Due to the lack of internal monitoring, the company misled its investors, misled its own stakeholders, misled its internal employees that were really trusting this organization. There was a complete chaos about the financial health for years together through fraudulent accounting practices. So that's what I talked about, the second point of ineffective risk management. And finally, cultural and behavioral barriers that are created within the organization. I have always been a firm believer that culture eats strategy for breakfast. I have lived by this. I have urged my leaders to go by this. Resistance really starts with your culture being right, especially again, large organizations for legacy organizations. And let me give you an example here of JCPenney, right? We all know in 2011, JCPenney was trying to come up with this entire rebranding strategy. They were trying to rebrand their business models. They were trying to rebrand their stores. They were trying to rebrand um, pretty much everything that they were trying to do. They had a new leadership. Now, unfortunately, the existing leaders who were not sitting at the top of the pyramid were absolutely not in alignment with this new strategy, because the leaders sitting at the top of the pyramid did not invest much into building that culture, into breaking the behavioral barriers. And we know what happened. They failed miserable. So these are the top three, and I'll repeat that one more time. The first one that I talked about is your siloed operations. The second one is inflexible governance and ineffective risk management. And the third is the leaders at the top not investing enough in building that culture and in breaking the behavioral barriers that come up every time there's a new strategy launched in the organization.
Yeah. And great points you have made, Mithun. These three are, I agree with you, are the key, factor, key element that creates a wide gap between the strategy and execution. And again, I want to add my own input from my own work experience. Even you rightly said when ineffective governance, Mithun, you rightly said, some organizations are, and especially the strategic leader, they are more focusing on the external enterprise environmental factor. They are looking into maybe the political changes, the economical factor, the legal, the technology. We have the model called pestle analysis, the TCOP, the STEEP, the spectrum model. So they are more focusing on the what's happening outside the organization, and they are only focused on looking into the strategy. They are not focused on the execution side at all. This is what I have realized in many organizations, global organizations where I have personally worked. They leave it, rightly said, siloed operation. They never pitch in, they never have that governance from what's happening on the execution side. Their entire focus is only on the the external enterprise environmental assessment kind of things and all. And another point, I agree with you, Mithun. This is a great point you have made. Behavioral problem, the cultural and the behavioral. I'll tell you, Mithun, my own experience. This is the year 2007, I recollect, and I was part of a big organization that point of time. My organization, and I was at a junior level that point of time. I was not into a strategic level. I was into more in an execution team, was heading the, some projects and program kind of things at that point of time. And, my organization had a strategy. They had in strategic changes. They decided to, walk into the agile transformation journey. They decided, we will become and we will, adopt more agile practices, agile behavior, agile framework. But the execution team, when I was heading some of the execution initiative in the form of project and program, and let me be very frank, Mithun, I didn't have that much knowledge of agile at that point of time. And now I was the person, who again is my behavior. I'm linking it to the behavioral problem. My behavior at that point of time is I was complete no to this agile strategy formation or adaptation into the, because I thought I will lose my power. I thought I will lose control over my team. I thought maybe I will be replaced because that was my lack of knowledge on the agile kind of things and all. And that led to a big gap between the execution team and the strategy team. Only once, when we had those meeting, this consultation, this collaboration, and then be able to come to a common page. And in fact, Mithun, that is what I want to take in the my segment 3. In my segment 3, I want to, discuss more strategies to bridge this gap. How the organization is bridging this gap effectively? What are the some actionable steps that you would recommend which will bridge this gap between strategic thinking and the execution of those strategy by the execution team in these large organizations?
Great. Let's talk about that. So, in the prior segment, Kailash, we were talking about what are the gaps. And I cited some examples and research and white papers. Really, there's a myriad of information and content on why that gap exists. But if you really go on a hunt of trying to find out now what really is the solution and how to fix it, very little exists. So if somebody's thinking of writing a white paper on this or publishing a journal article, a very good topic to pick. But let's talk about what are some of the solutions, right? Now, again, I have been into this strategy, planning, strategy, execution, and bringing that to success role for almost a decade now, right? And what I've learned is if somebody wants to bridge this gap between strategy and execution, I think it's a two-pronged approach. You have to go ahead and look at the structural aspects, and you also have to look at your cultural aspects. And that's how things will dovetail well. It cannot be done in isolation where you just go and fix your processes and your technology. That's your structure. And then just not care about what's going on culturally. And we just talked about in the previous segment how culture eats strategy for breakfast. So how would I do it? And what has worked for me? One, I think I would tie the organizational strategy to operations. Very important step. So ensuring that every project, every program, every global portfolio that your organization has is explicitly aligned to the strategic goals of your organization. And when I talk about this, I have this framework or a model, if you will, which I always advocate in my projects, and I call this strategy to outcome model. This model just creates a very seamless link between the strategic intent of your organization and your operational delivery. Beautifully ties these things together. So one really needs to remember at the inception stage itself that you ought to define and outline the goals and objectives before you start running around and start implementing the strategy. This will just ensure that there's consistency, there's alignment throughout your execution process. So the first one, I call it tie your strategy to your operations. The second one is embrace agile governance. I cannot say that enough. I've seen, and even in my doctorate research, there are a lot of analogies and research papers and great research scholars who've talked about it. Governance should facilitate, not hinder execution. For example, what we do is we use very flexible reporting structures that adapt to the complexity of global organizations. We already talked about the size of the organization becoming a challenge when it comes to execution. So let's not add more layers and make it more complicated than it needs to be. So embrace agile governance is the second aspect that can help you bridge this gap. And third thing is invest in your people. No matter how great your strategic initiatives are, you could be whoever sitting right at the apex of your pyramid and building great strategies. But I guarantee, Kailash, I guarantee you cannot implement them alone. No matter, like I said, where you sit and who you are in the organization, the success of your strategy really depends on the support of your employees. It depends on the support of your stakeholders and your customers, all of them. So invest in these people. One of the most effective ways to earn your team's support is by communicating to them very early on how the strategic initiative or your vision is aligned with the company's core values. I've learned over a period of time that the best of the companies, the ones that are most competitive and the ones that have led in the industry decade after decade, they put enormous emphasis on strategy, explaining to all their people, whether it's employees, your stakeholders, your customers, how that fits really well into the core values of your organization. So building a culture of accountability and collaboration is absolutely non-negotiable. That's a given. But how much you as a leader invest in explaining your people about the company's core values and your strategies and how they beautifully fit together works wonders. And that's where people will be able to see the big picture. Me sitting at the bottom of the pyramid or as a mid-level manager, I should exactly know how my actions, no matter how small or big they are, how it's leading to the big picture. How am I contributing to the core values of the organization? Once I know that, once I feel that, I automatically develop a sense of belonging towards this project or program, and then there's no looking back. So to summarize, how I would do it and what has worked for me is I would focus on the structural and the cultural aspect of it. And I would do three things to begin with. One is tie my strategy to my operations. Second, I will embrace agile governance. And the third thing is I will invest in my people. So these are the three aspects.
So very well said, Mithun. An excellent point to bridge this gap and closing this gap between strategy to execution. And again, you very well said. The first, the first very important point you said is tying the strategy to execution and the ongoing operations. And you rightly explained this model, the S2O model, the strategy to outcome model. And this model is very popularly used in EY and many other organizations as well. But along with this very popular model, S2O model, we also have, and I remember you also spoke about balanced scorecard. I think so. This is another popular model where strategy to execution connect, where strategy and execution connection can be established in a very great model to connect the strategy to execution. Along with, we have a model such as OKR, the objectives and key results, the McKinsey's 7S framework, the value stream mapping, and the Hoshin Kanri's, the Japanese framework of connecting the strategy to execution. So I think so, Mithun, these model, of course, in another podcast, we may go deeper into these S2O model, which you have quoted in your discussion. We would love to go more detail in depth about talking about this model itself. And we may also talk about whether it's a McKinsey 7S model or value stream mapping model. We will go deeper. But, this is a great framework which you have, added, saying that they can really help you. And they have a structured methodology using this model to bridge that particular gap. And of course, you also added, I couldn't agree more with you, Mithun. You said the investing on people. I think so. What I'm also realizing, Mithun, in even my organization, add-on skills, I really have now believed that, no matter how your strategy team is, have experience, have their own knowledge and all, until the execution team is not empowered, until they are not, what I'm trying to tell you that, we need to, we need to work on their motivation. We need to, and you rightly said, sharing them the common vision of the organization. I think so that communication, the vision is not being effectively communicated with that execution team, and that leading to that gap. And they are not able to understand that what is their role in the organizational success, in strategy success. They always, you rightly said, one of the factors is siloed. They have always been neglected. The execution team has not given that much of importance, the weightage. I think so. And especially, as I said, especially in the large organization where people are too much busy with understanding the external environment, they are not investing into their, you rightly said, into their internal operations and internal execution and their team. I think so. You rightly said, we need to invest more on these execution kind of the team, the people at who have the equal percentage in the overall organization success. Because what's the use of creating a strategy and having if the people are not aligned to that strategy? So I think so. These are the great insight which you have shared, and I hope my audience will able to using these 3-4 strategies which you have shared to bridge the gap. They will able to bridge their strategy execution gap. I think that's a great segment.
I wanted to add one more. I wanted to add one more point when we are talking about the whole invest in people, right? And what has worked for me. So when I'm consulting, I tell these leaders who come up with the vision and mission statement, and then I'm done, right? And then as a leader, I've given my vision and mission. Now my direct line of reporting and their managers will go and ensure that things are done. What I've been coaching these leaders is that don't make your strategy an annual town hall thing, right? We go and talk about it once in a year, saying, hey, we launched this strategy and hope you're working on it. Rather, what I advocate these people is mid-level managers should be checking periodically and as often as they can with the juniors in the team on whether they really understand what they're doing and how their day-to-day work fits into the strategy, fits into the core values of the organization. I believe that if a junior in the team is able to articulate that, hey, the financial year 2025 or 2026 strategy is such and such, and I know it fits with this core value of the organization, I think your leadership team is doing a fantastic job.
Absolutely, Mithun. And I'll second that, and I also want to share that nowadays the strategy team has realized and they have started involving these execution team into their strategic meeting. In the leadership meeting, they are inviting them. There is a special place for them, and they are being part of, I think so, the strategy discussion, the leadership discussion. And I think so that we are seeing the trend toward, where, the strategy team and the execution team is working together toward this overall success. Let's move on to segment 4. And in this segment, we will talk about technology as an enabler. So Mithun, what I feel in today's world, technology cannot be ignored, and technology can play a greater role in bridging this, a gap between the strategy and execution. So I would like to hear from you how technology can be an enabler in closing this gap.
That's a very good one, Kailash. I think technology plays an absolute pivotal role here. It's really the backbone that provides visibility, accountability, as well as a lot of adaptability while the team is executing the strategy. So for the clients that I have worked for or the global strategy projects that I really lead, I focus on 3 technology aspects of it. Firstly is the tools, really your portfolio management tools. And here we are talking about Power BI, tools like Clarity PPM, and various other tools that are available today, really which help the organization monitor the execution at every stage, real time, and identify the bottlenecks very early on before they really turn into a risk, and then you have to sit down and identify mitigations and so on and so forth. So your portfolio management tools is, I think, number 1 when it comes to technology.
Yes.
Number 2 is your AI-driven insights, and we are already in it. It's not something that we need to wait for a few more months or years. Artificial intelligence is already helping a lot of leaders managing these global strategic projects to make data-driven decisions. So it's helping them analyze large amount of data where there's a lot of volume with what you're doing. Think about these global projects, let's say across 20, 30 countries, a lot of people involved, and there are a lot of projects and programs under your portfolio. And that's where your AI-driven insights would help. And finally, something that I am very personally curious about, and I want to get a little deeper into it over the next few weeks and months, is your digital twins for strategy simulation. So this is an emerging trend where a lot of organizations simulate the impact of strategic decisions in a very virtual test environment before going ahead and implementing them. So I think this is something that will be very interesting for the upcoming future. And to give you an example, I think a few years ago, we were running a global program for a multinational firm to implement a portfolio management tool that consolidates data and analyzes it and gives decision-making metrics across 62 countries. This tool provided all the leaders with real-time insights into program performance. And like I said, it enabled them at every stage take the right decisions and make the course corrections as and when needed. So to sum it up, technology is the backbone and you cannot achieve much without it. So that's my take.
I think so. Very well said, Mithun. All the three points you said about technology as an enabler, whether it's the Clarity PPM tool, and also you said about the Microsoft tool Power BI. And I couldn't agree more than what you said. The Power BI, they can give you the strategic leader, the real-time picture, what's happening at the project and program level in more graphical manner, in more data analytics and data analytics. And this Power BI using the data analytics, that can be used to effectively bridge the gap between the strategy and execution. You also said about, the Clarity PPM. And I want to tell you, Mithun, I have used a lot of time Microsoft, another tool, because I have been Microsoft certified trainer and working a lot into the Microsoft space, whether using Power BI, again, Microsoft tool, whether using Microsoft EPM, Enterprise Project Management Solution. So Microsoft EPM is another great way to bridge the gap between strategy and execution, because tool via SharePoint, enabling SharePoint, Microsoft Project Server, it can give you the real-time pictures of all the execution, the projects that being executed to, to implement the organization strategy. That can very, very helpful to bridge this gap. And your second point is AI. Very well said again, Mithun. And AI can definitely in today's time give you a lot of insight about your strategy implementation approach, even these projects and program manager and the operations manager who are managing the ongoing strategic deliverables. The AI can is helping a lot in today's time. And nothing, you said absolutely, the digital twins where you simulate your strategy before actually implementing it. I think so. This is a great model where the strategic leader should first try to create an environment where they can simulate the strategy, its impact, and then maybe invest into the project and program to execute the strategy. And this is the way they can bridge a lot of gaps. So this is very well said, Mithun, and thank you for sharing this great insight in this segment of technology as an enabler. Mithun, let's move on to another very important segment. In this segment, we'll talk about the role of leadership. I think so, you will agree with me. The leadership is a very critical factor in bridging this gap between strategy and execution. I want to ask you, what qualities should, the leaders cultivate to succeed, in bridging this gap between strategy and execution, Mithun?
Good one. I think the entire accountability of the success of getting your strategy into a successful execution mode and then bringing it to complete fruition sits with the leadership. Leadership is absolutely vital. And I think the leaders themselves should be the bridge between the strategy and execution gap that we've been talking about. We touched upon how important it is for the leaders to communicate. Over communication is way better than sticking to explaining your strategy and how that fits into the core values of the organization to just a 6 monthly or an annual town hall where a leader comes and talks about it and then really not much happens. I'd rather have the mid-management talk to all their team members very regularly, whether that's through focus group discussions or through one-on-one meetings with them or through survey questions that they can roll out to really get a pulse of their team And when I say pulse of the team, I'm really talking about, does your team understand whatever they're doing day to day, their tasks and the projects that they're associated with? Do they understand how that work adds up and leads to the overall strategy that leaders have communicated, and how that strategy fits into the core values of the organization? So that communication is very important. In continuation to that leadership point that we were talking about, in my projects, I have always focused and I've always urged all the members who are a part of the leadership team or the decision making members to foster collaboration, to make sure that there's a lot of flexibility and adaptability and a growth mindset across the teams, whether that's the strategy team, whether that's the implementation team, or the people who are really rolling up their sleeves and working on the ground. For instance, we were in the recent past, we were doing a transformation project at a global level, multiple countries involved, multiple stakeholders involved. What I think was a distinguishing factor for the success of this program was we ensured that we got budgets and we trained all the leaders involved to become more empathetic and inclusive. We also trained them on communication and change management. I think investment into that for all the decision-making members significantly boosted the employee engagement and the program outcomes. So if we compare these kind of initiatives that we run for the leaders and equip them as opposed to programs where we've not done anything to bring our leaders up to speed and get them involved in this change management, we see a stark difference. So that's what leadership can do, and that's why I said leadership is absolutely vital to make or break your program. So not just investing in your members, but also investing a little bit in the leaders or the mid-managers who are running these programs for you will be very beneficial.
Absolutely, Mithun. And, I want to share my experience around this. I was working with one global company and, I had an experience with the head of the organization at the chief executive level. I always saw a CEO has a very large cabin. And whenever this person wanted to, had any meeting or anything, he never used to come into the meeting room. He never used to go to the conference room. He always used to invite us into his cabin. And, entire day, we couldn't, see him on the floor where, the people are sitting, where the people are, doing the real execution of his vision, of his strategy. And there I found that, is this the right way of doing it? And you rightly said, sometimes over communication is better than lack of communication and lack of collaboration with these execution team who are executing his vision, the CEO's vision, his strategies which he wanted for the organizational success. So this experience came in mind. I thought I'll share with you. And, very well said point you said about the, the empathy. This is very, very important in today's leadership. It's a very important angle to the emotional intelligence as well, where today's leader needs to be show more empathy. And I think so that's already happening. I saw some of the traditional leadership style, which are more command and control way. They used to command their strategy and do this way, do that way, where, there was no empathy and there was no inclusivity. You said including the execution team into aligning them to their vision, aligning them to their strategy. So that inclusivity is definitely a great point you made, and showing empathy, having the emotional angle to the leadership, because this execution team is very heavily investing into the organization and into these projects and program initiatives. So that's really a great point about the leadership. And you rightly said today is not just the execution team needs to go through the training, but correct me, Mithun, if I'm wrong. The leadership training is, I think so, is also taking a big push in many organizations.
Absolutely, yeah. So, because I think, Kailash, it's not necessary that every leader in the past has undergone these kind of trainings and is sensitive to these kind of topics, especially when you are managing people across multiple countries, time zones, cultures, behaviors. Some of the leaders are first-time leaders because they are newly promotes. So having a little budget for these kind of trainings for the leaders and the decision makers is equally important.
Absolutely. I think so, Mithun. I know we are talking from last around 1 hour, but in this last segment, I want to briefly touch upon integrating the risk management with your the strategy execution. And I believe that without risk management, of course, we said many other aspects to bridging this gap, and you have shared your experience. But do you also believe, Mithun, the risk management should be integrated with the strategy execution aspect for the successful, the successful strategy outcome and all, Mithun?
Absolutely, not just integrated, it should be a part of every cadence that you have as a part of your governance. So, what I mean by that, and since we're talking about risk, is every time there's a governance cadence, whether you run it fortnightly or monthly with your steering committee, risk management has to be an integral part of that discussion. What I mean by that is the presenter needs to have a list of all the anticipated risks and probably even suggest mitigation plans. And if they already don't exist, then use this group, all these brainy members that you have on the table, to come up with some mitigation plans so that when the actual risks hit you, you're ready. You're not running pillar to post on trying to find out what's going on. Another thing you could do is, while a lot of good project and portfolio managers and program managers focus on external risks, I highly recommend that you please think of your internal risks as well. And in my experience of a lot of projects failing, I think internal risks have come because I think the biggest reason is because there was no alignment between the strategy and the execution right from the inception phase. What I really mean by that is one needs to have a direct alignment of every project with the strategy. If a project or a program or a portfolio does not show a linkage with your strategy, then that has to be questioned. That's a clear risk right there. The second thing is risks come when technology has not been planned wisely. Projects and programs are not using tools and data to enhance the visibility and the decision making. I think that's a big failure point. A lot of risks will come when your leaders are not investing in building that culture. Your leaders are not empowered themselves, nor are they equipping the teams that are involved to run those projects. So these are some of the risks that are very internal and that have to be focused. Of course, external risks are always talked about, and people are thinking about political and environmental and what's going on with the competitors. And I've seen hours and days invested in mitigating those risks. But let's focus a little bit on the internal risks as well and make that a part of your regular discussions with your steering committee and your sponsors. And that ways you've covered your risks in a holistic way.
Absolutely, Mithun. I, agree with you. Leaders today are not focusing on the internal enterprise risk. They are more focusing on external enterprise risk. And, Mithun, and do you also, think that AI can also help you in lot of predictive analysis, identifying the risk? Mithun,
Absolutely. It already is helping. I think we touched base a little bit in one of the segments where we're saying that especially for these large organizations where your strategy programs are across multiple countries and there are hundreds of people involved, just think about the amount of data that you're dealing with and that data turning into something meaningful and giving you decision-making metrics. That's empowerment. And I think AI is already doing that. It's nothing that we have to wait until near future. We use a lot of that. Clients that I have been working with for the last few months now are using it already, and it's doing wonders.
Absolutely. So, Mithun, we have discussed a lot around this topic. During this segment, we spoke about, the what is this gap between strategy and execution, and we spoke about some of the key factors that actually bridges this gap. And then you have shared how what are the solution to bridge this gap, and you also spoke about technology as an enabler and the leadership importance in bridging this gap and continuing with integrating the risk management aspect to bridge the gap between strategy and execution. I think so. This is a wonderful, wonderful, episode personally for me to learn, and I'm sure the listener to this podcast is going to get great insight, and it will help them think very deeply into the importance of this gap between strategy and execution. So I really want to thank you, Mithun, for spending your hours into this, sharing your wisdom, sharing your experiences for the P3M community. So I thanks once again, and really looking forward to meeting you again. And I really want to do a lot of more topic with you, Mithun. So thank you for that. Actually, yeah.
Pleasure, Kailash. Thank you for having me over. And I personally look forward to having more discussions with you on myriad topics related to projects, programs, governance. I think that's our way of giving back to our community. And as a closing statement, like I always say, even during the kickoff meetings of our strategy projects, is the leaders who are involved with the execution of strategy and bringing that to fruition, they really need to remember that it's not just about bringing something to a closure, but it's more about building an organization that can adapt and thrive in the face of change. That's one. And secondly, people work for people. So, as leaders, how much you invest in the teams that you're working with, what kind of culture you build, how invested you are, I think these two things will go a long way. And then, of course, there's technology and there's risk and all of that. But if you take care of the culture, if you take care of mentoring and grooming your members to thrive, I think you're creating a lot of wonderful memories for the people that work for you and they work with you. Any change management happens through people and by people. So that's the essence of making your projects, programs, and portfolio successful and bridging the gap between the strategy and the execution. Thank you.
Awesome. So thank you. And finally, to my audience, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening to this podcast. And, please do share your comment, subscribe to this show. And, we intend to add value to the community by inviting the expert guests alike, Mithun, and, sharing their practical work experiences, their lesson learned, their the best practices they are implementing over the years, and this will add to fast track the P3M career. So thank you once again, and see you very soon in another exciting episode of P3M with Kailash Upadhyay. Signing off.